This changed every week for the first, 5 or 6 weeks of the first group. Because we were looking at lots of videotape, and if we saw something on videotape that we couldn't explain by the circle, then we had to change the circle.
Well, and then what preceded it was this.
The rhythm
of a relationship.
Rhythm of relationship. Right?
And then what we have is we have two circles, and one circle represented the parent following the child's need, and the other circle was the child having to follow the parent's need. So this was the first insecure model,
Right.
The limited circle model.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we have all these lines, how the kid and the parent jump back and forth between these two realities.
Right.
And this was the first concept the time we tried to do it.
Right. And we call it the rhythm of relationship, and you needed a PhD to be able to decipher it. It's really complex. We'll make it available online, but it's really still way too complex for us, let alone for parents or therapists. But the pieces are there, right?
Well, and here was the gift of Head Start parents. We would present this, and they were not shy about their feedback.
Right.
They would just shake their head and say, well, that's just stupid. I don't know what you're talking about.
Right,
And we'd
right.
say, okay.
And go back to the drawing
Go back
board
to
and
work.
get clearer and clearer. Not simpler and simpler, but clearer and clearer.
That's good.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they forced us to be clear until we came up with this mantra: if it doesn't make sense to a 16-year-old street parent, we're not going to teach it.
Right.
And that's our mantra, which is it has to make sense to them. And if it does, it'll probably make sense to us, is the way I always look at it. And it often does. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that came very much from the groups you were doing at Crosswalk.
Yeah,
With
yeah.
the teen moms
yeah,
and because I remember actually both valuing and being frustrated with it, because we'd have an idea and you'd hand it and it's like, no, it's not understandable.
It's not clear.
And so we had to keep going back to the drawing board over and over again, and so it was hard and frustrating, but I can't believe how it was incredibly valuable.
Well,
Absolutely.
therein again is, I think, the joy of working together. We loved honing this, and we loved working together as we honed it. So it didn't become territorial, or I said this better last week, or anything. It was just like, you're right. We get to rethink this. And rather than that being burdensome, it was actually enjoyable. And that's been the story of our work.
Yeah.
It's always been enjoyable to work together. And I think that comes through in the model, right?
Well, it's more complicated than that. Kent would come up with an idea. Bert would argue about it. By the time Bert convinced me Kent was wrong, he'd convinced Kent, Kent convinced me he was right. Bert convinced Kent he was wrong, and then I'd convince Bert that Kent was wrong about being right, and it would just go and go and go. And I remember so vividly writing emails at 2 o'clock in the morning because we had full-time jobs and we taking care of families.
This was our this was just
Our recreation.
This was our recreation. This is what we did in the evenings and weekends, right? And in the hallway at work.
And at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'd say, I think I got it. And I'd send out an email, and I'd get responses from both these guys.
Right. Yeah. And then our wives would say, hey, we have a life here, so. Yeah.